What's going on, fellas? Today I am going to talk to you guys about a little injury I picked up, why I think it happened, and what I'm doing about it, right? So the other week I was squatting. I worked up to a top single of like 680 on the SSB, moved okay, went on to some back downs to get in some extra volume because I'm not usually a top single and back down kind of guy. I just find that style of training, the quality of the back downs tends to suffer, although I definitely see its place within programming. I think it makes a lot of sense to prepare for a 1RM in the most specific manner possible, which is practicing setting up and executing a single, especially in that 90 to 95% range makes for very good practice. So I started implementing that, and lo and behold, the reason I don't like doing it is kind of the reason I messed it up, right? Which is that I feel that if you bring enough intensity and enough focus to the top single, you're drained enough that your intensity or your focus for the back down sets can sometimes suffer. And failing to focus for working sets, I often find is an issue. Did 3 reps at, I believe it was about 640 pounds. I was going to do 5, I think was the initial plan. Did the 4th rep, and I kind of changed my mechanic a little bit. I cut the rep like manually rather than bottoming out like I aim to do generally when I'm squatting on the SSB and getting a little bit of a stretch reflex. I more so manually reversed it and cut it high, right? And what ended up happening was that placed a lot of stress on my left patellar tendon, and I tweaked it. This is an injury that I've actually had happen to me a couple of times, all on the same side, so still kind of a chronic injury in that regard. I got pissed off in my prep for a strongman contest from manually reversing the dip on push presses with the axle. I've found that push pressing, unless you've done a lot of them and have a weightlifting background, are one of the hardest things on your knees out there because you're really manually reversing it in that high position where you don't have a lot of strength. You'll oftentimes, if you goof it at all, you'll lose the weight off your heels. So I got pissed off back then, and I pissed it off squatting a while ago. So generally speaking, what has caused it is failing to bottom out, which is how I do the majority of my reps. You'll hear pain science guys kind of get into this idea that no, your form isn't a predictor of risk of injury, right? We believe this because we can build up strength in just about any position, right? So it's like as we build up gradually, we develop our tissue tolerance, because all an injury is usually is exceeding the tissue tolerance. If we develop, position specific strength for a round back deadlift gradually with time, more than likely that won't be an injurious motion. It might not be the best way to deadlift, which is why we might call it bad form, even if it isn't inherently harmful. But if you did hurt yourself, the error falls to poor load selection more so than it does the position itself. That's the argument, right? But my counter argument, I've run this by my physical therapist, he's an evidence-based guy, he's a very smart guy, I respect him, and I was like, hey, what do you think of this phrasing? I was like, we know strength is position specific, so if we go up to a heavy single and we let our form slip and we deviate significantly, if we leave the positions where we have developed this strength, this tissue tolerance, and we deviate into a significantly different position, is it safe to say that there's a higher injury risk associated with that? He's like, yeah, as long as you phrase it that way, it's not just, oh, you have bad form, that's why you got hurt. It's because you prepared in one way and then you entered a different position under very heavy load. As long as you phrase it that way, I think it's reasonable. And in this case, I believe that's what I did, right? I cut the rep, I applied a higher peak torque probably to my knee than I normally do because I'm not bottoming out and kind of relying on my calf hitting my hamstring. So I goofed a rep. It's happened to me once or twice before. Full clarity, I'm hurt, it hurts, but it's not that bad. I could probably go squat 700 tomorrow and be okay, but I've determined that if I continue pushing in the way that I need to end this training cycle with an all-time PR, my risk of making it into a worse injury is higher. So it's not necessarily stopping me from doing sets, it just hurts while I do the sets. But I think that if I push hard enough to get stronger at my level through the remainder of this block, there's a good chance that turns into a worse injury. Because I did try to stick it out last week. I think I worked up to a 10 pounds heavier single and hit it back down. It was just uncomfortable. My knee was a little pissed off the next day. But I managed to get it done, and I think I could do that indefinitely. And while I probably should back off enough to give it time to heal, I could do that. I just don't think it'll be safe if I make the big push that I was planning on for like a 740 SSB. So I've determined that to not be wise. So one, why it happened. That's why it happened. I kind of reversed the squat. It was a pre-existing kind of chronic injury, deviated my positioning or my technique significantly from how I prepared, because I'm a big believer that while injuries are part of the game, picking up little things like this where I'm not badly hurt, I can still go squat 700 pounds just fine. Smaller scale injuries like this one, I think the larger scale ones can largely be avoided. They do happen now and then, and it's not always the person's fault, absolutely. But I do think smaller scale injuries to some degree are just part of the game, and knowing how to rehab them and train around them, not just quitting training and not just resting completely, but also not being stubborn and pushing through and making it worse. Learning how to train around those and keep getting stronger in the areas you can get stronger is just part of becoming a more advanced lifter. You have that good study that came out 20 years ago that was how dangerous is powerlifting, like the rate of injury per 1,000 participant or 1,000 hours, and powerlifting actually fell well below many other sports that are much more dynamic. Like even soccer was significantly more injurious, and I think the reason for that is because we can prepare for powerlifting. We know what bar, we know what motions we're going to be doing. We get to pick our own weights. We know what plates. We can prepare very thoroughly. We can come in over-prepared for the demands, whereas in a dynamic sport, there's so many, you don't know what's coming. You can't over-prepare to the same degree, so injuries are more likely to arise. So over-preparation, building up strength in the positions, how we're going to execute that 1RM can make powerlifting a fairly safe sport, right? As well as good sleep, good nutrition, good hydration, and good preparation. Generally, I don't get hurt very often, and most of the time I'm not in pain, even lifting the weights that I'm lifting, if I'm managing my variables correctly. But now and then you make a mistake, something small gets tweaked, you got to learn how to deal with it. So kind of talking about why I think it happened. The other reason why I think it happened, and this is kind of just a general training philosophy of mine, is I like to be a little bit over-prepared. I don't train in the most specific manner because I'm not a powerlifter. I'm not just training competition style squat, bench, and deadlift. When I do compete, I compete in strongman, which is more varied. So my strength training looks a little bit more varied. And philosophically, I like to have enough variation to where if I do fudge my positions a little bit, I do have plenty of a surplus of strength in any given area to where I can get away with it. Easy example is, I've built up my mid-back, my spinal erectors, my trunk enough that if I round my back mid-SSB squat, I'm fine. I've done that a million times to get a heavy rep done. I'm fine. It doesn't hurt the next day. I don't feel I have any real risk of injury. Same thing on a deadlift is if I am doing a really hard rep and I let my back round a little bit to keep the weight moving, I'm fine. I feel fine. So if I'm doing my heavy good mornings, my RDLs, my stiff legs, building up my lats, my mid-back, spinal erectors, my core, and my glutes, I generally have a lot of faith in my ability to deviate that position without a lot of worry. A similar example was I used to strain my shoulders anytime I really got out of the groove or didn't warm up sufficiently for bench, but keeping a strong overhead press, keeping my whole shoulder girdle relatively strong has made it so that I could miss the groove pretty badly on my bench press, and I feel fine the next day, right? So just keeping that whole joint strong with a little bit more variety of training my vertical presses. I have not really, knock on wood, hurt myself benching in quite some time other than small pec strains, right? So, and when I have small pec strains, I think it's because I've underprepared my pecs to some degree, right? To some degree. We can only bulletproof you can't bulletproof everything or you're not gonna have any time to do real training. But including something with a greater range of motion, like a deep dumbbell bench press or a a buffalo bar type press, to build up a little surplus of strength in the pecs. I've made it so I strain my pecs less frequently, right? And I've determined that I've got a good margin of error for most technical deviations that realistically could occur at my level without it being horribly embarrassing for most lifts, except for my squat. If I cut my squat, my knee blows up. And to me, I look back at my old training log, and this is the nice part about physically logging your training is if you want to, you can go look back. And I looked back over my training and how I structured it in the past when my knees felt super healthy, because at times my knees felt great. They felt like I could hit them with a bomb and they would be fine. And I think it's boiled down to, in recent months, I have tried to distill down my training volume more towards the minimum effective dose rather than pushing towards the maximum recoverable volume, just because I felt that's what I needed to do at the time to get better. It's worked quite well, putting in more quality work over quantity work, which is something I think generally more advanced lifters need to focus on. So I was just kind of actually following my own advice for once, kind of filed things down into what I felt was necessary and not doing a ton of the whole throw the kitchen sink at it approach. And in my effort to do so, looking back at my training when my knees were quite healthy, I think it's pretty simple that I decreased my knee extension / squat pattern volume too much. I think it's fallen below the threshold to keep it healthy. And this is something I talk about in meet preps. I think that there's a certain amount of volume that you need to kind of stimulate blood flow on a weekly basis to keep yourself feeling healthy. I think when you drop your volume below a certain threshold, oftentimes that'll result in actually feeling more banged up through the joint because you're not getting as much motion, you're not getting that medium scale stimuli like every other week or every week. So I think what I did is I dropped my quad volume back too much in the effort to try to find what the minimum for each thing was. That's looked really good on my upper body days. I've been performing wonderfully. It's just been like vertical press, vertical pull, horizontal press, horizontal pull, and then my direct tricep and external shoulder rotation work, and that's the day. And that's worked very, very well for me. My deadlift work, has looked like training the lower back in some hip hinging fashion 3 days a week, making sure that I include basically a reverse hip hinge, so a hanging leg raise or a weighted sit-up. Anytime that I am doing the hip hinge, as long as I do those things, I feel healthy. My deadlifts are feeling strong. All my hinging is feeling very strong. I think I missed the ball with my deadlift, right? I included my core work. I missed the ball with my squat, I'm sorry. I included all my core work, I included my squat, I included my mobility, which I have found to be an integral part of my success when it's going well, but I do believe I dropped off the accessory volume for my quads a little bit too much. So what am I doing to fix it? So from a programming perspective, I'm basically adding in to end any lower session where I hit a squat, like abs, a squat pattern motion, a hinge pattern motion, and I would generally hit some bit of posterior chain work. That's what I was doing prior because I have found a deficiency with the little bit of lower scale posterior chain work at the end. I'm also going to be hitting one set of a squat patterned motion. And I decided I would probably just stick to unilateral stuff for that to try to hit two birds with one stone, keep my hips healthy, keep my glutes strong. The way I have always viewed it is if we are training the squat, we're going to hit the limit. If we're training squats and deadlifts simultaneously, especially, we're going to hit the limit for how much volume our lower back can handle before we're anywhere near what our legs can handle. So in squat programming, especially if it's alongside deadlifts or RDLs, there is a need for a motion that's going to let you do squat pattern or knee extension based motion that's not going to tax the lower back. So that way, once the lower back is fried, we can't do much more squatting. We can run up that little bit extra to get up to the similar amount of work for the quads so that they can continue to get stronger as well. Because I think if you stop at where your lower back stops you, the quads never develop as well as they could. So I've always found there's a need for that, whether it be a hack squat, a leg press, a belt squat, a pendulum squat, split squat. Any of these motions will get the job done. To some degree, a front squat can get the job done, but I usually would prefer a split squat in a home gym setting. But I've always found a need for these motions. Lo and behold, I'm an idiot. So I got rid of this motion I found a need for. But I think that the idea that exposing your legs to heavy tonnage, that where you're not limited by your back and doing these crazy heavy belt squats or crazy heavy leg presses, and exposing the tissue in your legs to crazy tonnages is a bit overrated. I really don't think that's where the benefit's from. I think it's from the additional volume that your legs are able to handle. I don't think that moving crazy tonnages is where that benefit is deriving from, because I've tried that. I pushed really heavy leg presses thinking, hey, I'll expose my lower body to really extreme loads because why not? It doesn't seem to beat me up that badly. And I don't think that's where the benefit came from. So I'm like, I've looked back to an old post made by Carlos Reyes on Instagram, who's a very high-level powerlifter, who's also a full-time firefighter, very smart guy, does the whole untested powerlifting thing in the healthiest way you possibly could. It's not perfectly healthy, but it doesn't get much healthier than that. Keeps himself in great shape for firefighting. All around a resource that I look to for what strength training done right looks like. And he was talking about how when he was coming off of some injuries, he was feeling really banged up. He was going to physical therapy 3 times a week. He began doing all of his accessory leg work as unilateral motion. And not only did his main lifts increase, he also got to the point where he was no longer needing to go to the physical therapist 3 times a week or at all, because there was no pain in his lower body, because it was able to hit 2 birds with 1 stone. He was able to do the hard sets, taking it to genuinely, this is the problem, people don't like working hard on unilateral shit, but taking it genuinely within 1 or 2 reps of failure, if not 2 failure. So he's able to get that box ticked off, but you're also going to be challenging your glute quite a bit more. You're going to be challenging your adductor quite a bit more. You're challenging that hip stability, glute med. You're challenging everything in the hips quite a bit more. And generally speaking, I view the squat as the most athletic of the three power lifts. So doing something that requires a little bit more athleticism, like balancing on a Bulgarian split squat, logically, I feel if that improves the athleticism, we're looking at the most athletic lift. In a lot of ways, that helps more than something extremely unathletic like a leg press. So that's going to be my approach, is I'm going to fill in those extra squat volumes with nothing but like weighted Cossack squats, split squats, whether it be split squats with dumbbells, split squats with the SSB, or split squats with a Zercher, or split squats on the belt squat. I'll vary it probably just to keep myself chasing different PRs on different implements, kind of keep it interesting. But I'm going to fill in all of that volume with unilateral work because I don't think the heavy tonnage associated with non-axially loaded bilateral leg work, I don't think that matters that much at this point in my career. I think I'm moving enough weight on the squats where I'm getting the heavy stimuli in. I don't need that, especially when I'm training yoke. I don't need to expose myself to great tonnages more than I already do. So if I can get the job done, I can get that additional knee extension volume in from motions that have a little bit less total weight, a little bit like just less heavy motions, right? Whether it be doing tricep press downs instead of heavy JM presses, because I'm getting the same benefit of that additional tricep volume past what I got from benching. I'm getting the same benefit with a little bit less absolute load, probably a little bit less wear and tear on the joint, less soft tissue damage to recover from. So that's what I'm doing from a programming perspective, is I'm going to be fitting in 3 times a week, kind of fiddling with the volume per session. Maybe it'll be 2 work sets, maybe it'll be 3. So 6 to 9 added work sets of squat patterned motion via unilateral work is what I'm doing from a programming perspective. And as far as just speeding up the recovery, I don't like backing off completely. So what I'm going to do is what I did last time I strained my knee, which is pausing all of my squats. Basically, by pausing it, instead of bouncing, we're reducing that peak moment on the knee joint. Makes it so it's tolerable enough that I feel I can gradually get better while still getting stronger, build up the hips, build up the quads a little bit with those pause squats. So yesterday when I squatted, I just worked up to like 560 for a pause triple on the SSB, which is about 100 pounds less than what I was planning on hitting for a triple without a pause, but easing into it. So pause all my squat volume instead of not do it, and that's also self-limiting in the load, so that way it's light enough and easy enough work that I will be able to gain some positive momentum as far as the knee rehab. I'm going to do my 4 10-minute walks I do per day after meals. I'm going to do the first half of each walk backwards, just because, you know, the whole knees over toes guys thing, I do like walking backwards. I think it's just a good way to, you know, drive blood flow to what is largely an avascular area. Tendons do not have a direct blood supply, so it's like moving the synovial fluid around, getting some localized blood flow is really good as far as speeding up the recovery of tendons. And the easiest, lowest scale way to do so is to walk backwards on a treadmill, and I'll just walk back forward for the other half because I can walk faster, get my heart rate up a little bit more, but build that into my already existing daily routine, as it's very low scale and it's very easy. And frankly, all, you know, fancy terminology or fancy guessed mechanisms of actions aside, my knee feels great after I do it, and anything that makes your knee feel good, you should probably do often. And then the only other thing I'm doing in addition to that, you know, keeping on top of my mobility, because I find when my mobility is poor, my knees hurt more. I don't think there's any evidence to support this. I've heard people say like, oh, if you got tight adductors, you got tight calves, your knees take more of a beating squatting. Totally possible. I find that bottoming out makes things much less banging up on my knee. So improving my mobility is something that I will continue to do. And the final thing is I will warm up for my training. Rather than 10 minutes on the wind bike, I'm just going to do a 10-minute weighted sled drag. Same benefit as the backwards treadmill walks, but in this case we're getting a little bit of more load associated, so maybe we can get some more robust adaptations out of it, as well as making my knee feel good. So this ended up being really long. For those of you who have watched all the way through, thank you guys. I appreciate all of you. Thank you for watching my videos. It means a whole lot to me.